All right, welcome to LPC today, week 5 of the legislative session. I would like to look for a motion to approve the minutes from last week's meeting. Do I have a motion? Oh, Mayor. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I had like one eye. Like one eye.
That's perfect.
Okay, and then I'll turn the time to Justin.
Yeah, I can start off today
Thanks.
if our slides are working. All right, good morning, good afternoon, just barely afternoon. Welcome to week 5. A couple of upcoming events just want to remind you of. One, March 16th to 18th in Washington, D.C. That is the NLC conference. If you haven't already let us know if you're going to that, please reach out to us, let us know. We'll have staff there and have some events and just want to help plan for that one. And then April 22nd through 24th in what Sean Guzman has promised will be sunny St. George. Personal guarantee. Hope to see you all there for that one as well. As always, we have a huge agenda to get through. Oh, we have those twice. I just want to show you this really quickly. This is a fun little graphic put out by the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. This shows the number of bills that are being drafted. And I know we've showed this a couple of times, but it gets more exciting every time we show it. As of an hour ago, there are 950 bills that are drafted and publicly released. Anyone know how many bills were drafted and publicly released last year total at the end of the session? 959. So we just need 10 more bills drafted, to have a record number of bills drafted and released. And I'm sure we'll break through that by the end of the day. So yes, if it feels like there are more bills than ever before, it's because there are, in fact, more bills than ever before. This is a different graph, though. A little bit of lag there. This is showing the number of bills passed by the legislature each week during the session. That red line down there at the bottom, if you can see that, that is this year. We're right about at the same rate, just a little bit below of number of bills being passed by the legislature. So more bills being drafted and publicly released, but roughly the same amount of bills being passed. We'll see what happens to that as we get near the end of the session, but there's a very real likelihood that a whole lot of those bills just don't go anywhere. And I'm sure we're all terribly sad about that. Messages for legislature. We reached out last week. We did a couple of action alerts or committee action alerts, and you all did your job, so thank you for that. So one, HB 184 was held in committee. That's Ray Ward's bill that we talked about in LPC last week. So thanks to everyone who reached out on that one. HB 501, which we'll talk about in just a second here, that is the water fees bill, has already been modified. And we'll talk about what some of that looks like. And then HB 470, this is a building inspection fee. We put an action alert on this just last night, was also held in committee, didn't pass out. So thank you for the work that you're doing, for reaching out to your legislators. Reminder, if we send out an action alert, when do we need you to respond? Now, correct. If you see action alert, we need you to respond. A vote is imminent on that one, either in a committee or on the floor. As more bills go to the floor and as more bills move through, there could be additional action alerts out there. In the best case scenario, we don't have an action alert because we're taking care of it before it gets that far, but that's probably not going to happen. I'm optimistic. I'm not crazy. All right. Moving on, let's talk about HB 501. This is the water fee bill. So we talked about this one last time, and many of you reached out to your legislators immediately and said, hey, we have concerns with this bill. We know you did that because we had legislators immediately reaching out to us and saying, hey, we hear you have concerns with this bill. So well done on that one. Appreciate this one. Just as a reminder, this is the study that says there are $102 billion worth of water infrastructure needs in the near 30, 40-year future. So a couple of clarifications from what we discussed last time and then some changes that have already been made in a substitute to the bill. So first off, this is the bill that says beginning January 1st, 2027, to qualify for the receipt of state funds for water development or water infrastructure, and this is either for public water or wastewater, an entity needs to raise their rates. Now, here's a clarification from last week. The rates stay with the local system. So the phrase is local contribution, which sure makes it sound like the fees are going somewhere else. But in reality, the rates stay with you. The fee increase would stay with your local system if you increase those rates. So it's not going to a state fund. It would stay with you. The formula hasn't changed, and thank you to everyone who did the math on this one and sent us some numbers. That's very helpful. You see there at the very bottom, this is the big change. Beginning January 1st, 2031, every system will have to raise their rates. That's out of the bill now. There is no mandate for everyone to have to raise their rates in 2031. So as the bill is drafted right now, only those entities that want to qualify for those state funds would have to look at raising their rates. And then those rates stay with the local system, which begs a little bit of a question. If you're keeping those rates in your own system, would you have to follow this exact formula, or could you just raise your rates to a level that covers what you need? That's a decision for you to make at the local level. So again, the changes in the substitute, one we didn't talk about. This exempts secondary water. Ag water was already exempted, but the substitute exempted secondary water, just applying to culinary water now. And then it removes that 2031 mandate for all systems. A couple of remaining points of concern. One, the rates are currently exempted from a reasonable basis test. From a policy perspective, it seems like an odd choice. Since all the other fees and rates that we have to have a reasonable basis. That's something we're talking to them about and have asked them to change, but that is a remaining point of concern there. Second, just that phrase, local contribution, is confusing when the money is staying with the local entity and not going somewhere else. So just from a clarity perspective, we would like them to figure out a different term there that is not local contribution. So with those changes, and we're going to ask a Slido here in just a second, but with those changes, any comments or questions about where this bill is at now? Procedurally, it will be in committee this afternoon. We'll expect them to have the sub, but Mike, do you want to come down? We have a couple comments on here. And remember to wait for Mike with the mic.
Can you just weigh in on what you mean that the secondary water is exempt? When we look at water affordability guideline for our city, we do include that.
So secondary
Part
water.
of the 1.5% that we try to keep it at that
Right.
rate.
So just the secondary water is exempt from the requirements of this bill. So if you wanted to get state funds, you would not have to raise your secondary water rates, just the other water rates. So you could. This isn't saying you.
Raise culinary rates to 1.5%.
Yes.
Beyond the water affordability guideline.
Correct.
That's my concern, that they should perhaps consider that secondary should be included in that.
And have you wait for the mic. So you're saying secondary should not be exempt.
It should be included as part of the 1.5%.
So, and to be clear, that's something you could do right now anyway. There's nothing that stops you from doing
We
that.
don't have any control over our secondary systems. That's the concern, is it's different companies.
Right.
This is Centerville, Gina Hurst Centerville.
Yes. So Senator, no, and so nothing would impact this. So if the Conservancy District, if the Water District wanted to raise rates, that's also within their power to do so.
Right, we just use what they're charging. I also watch what we're, like, we
Right.
combine them and say, we want to be not above 1.5%, because that's hard on our vulnerable population.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and we have raised some of those concerns about, where the rates are at. Yeah. So any other questions, concerns on this one? Yeah, back here and then over here.
I think this is a clarity issue as well, but some people are reading that and thinking that if you do both, it's 3% for each. And
That
I
it-
don't
it-
think
okay.
that's the,
Okay, yeah, that's a good clarification. So it is 1.5% if you were only water or only stormwater, or excuse me, sewer. So if you have wastewater, 1.5%. If you have culinary water, 1.5%. If you have both, 3% total.
Yep.
So it's not 3% for each. So
yeah, there are
that's good
people that don't
clarification.
believe that's what it says. So if they could clean that up, I think.
That is certainly their intention. So if that needs to be clarified, yeah, I can confirm that the intention is 3% for both, not for each. And then Sean had a comment over here or question.
Oh, Sean Guzman, St. George. Could you explain how this works with conservancy districts? Is it only if they're retailing water, do they get to assess or have to assess this fee in order to access state funds? Or do they have to do it to all of us? So we'll be essentially double taxed on
Yeah,
this?
that's a great question, Sean. And I know I cannot explain that to you. That is a question I have asked them though. And I've asked them to clarify what that looks like because I don't know exactly what that looks like. It's a clarification that I'm glad you brought that up.
We would want that clarified because they treat all of our culinary water in Washington County. So
Yeah, so that is a question that I've asked them to look at as well. So thank you for that. All right, with that, we're going to jump to Slido. So pull out your phones. We're getting into Slido early today. So given the changes in this bill, so the revenue stays with the local and the mandate has been removed, how high of a priority is it for us to oppose this bill at this point? And if you don't think we should oppose this bill, feel free to put low priority. That's an option as well. Yeah. What's our online question?
All right, so there's two kind of themes I'm seeing online. First, talking about the state account, where is the funding for that coming from?
That is a great question. Where the state funding is coming from is not entirely clear. The study that was done by Zions over the summer anticipated that there would in fact be a local contribution that would populate that state fund. Because the contribution stays with the local, it is not entirely clear where the state fund would be getting the money from, unless it's general fund, which is what we'd assume right now.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question was, what if a municipality is in some kind of interlocal or cooperative that would control rates? How would that work if the city, could the city still be eligible if the interlocal didn't raise rates?
So the way the bill stated, it doesn't say city, it says the provider. So if the interlocal is the provider, then that's who would need to look at it. But that's something that we could look at clarifying as well if we needed to.
Awesome.
All right. We're getting up to our threshold there. We've got over 150 responses on this one. Again, this bill is up in committee this afternoon. We expect of the changes that it will move forward, but the sponsor and others in House leadership have indicated that they're willing to continue working on this one and getting it into a better place. So we'll see where it keeps going. Certainly concerns left and clarification that is needed on this one, but it's moving in a positive direction. With that, economic development. Carson, turn it over to you.
Okay, for those online, and right now, Cassidy, how many people do we have online? Okay, so we have 255 people online, in addition to the 100 or so in the room. We're going to actually press pause here because our guest speaker is ahead of schedule. So thank you very much for that. But I'm excited and honored to welcome a former league president, a former mayor, and remember, once a mayor, always a mayor, former congressman, now United States Senator John Curtis, to take a few minutes to talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and how that impacts cities. So we're going to take a pause from talking about our capital to talk about the nation's capital. Mayor, welcome.
So first of all, thanks for letting me just jump in and interrupt you. But most important, if you don't remember anything else about what I say today, just know I think you rock. You are the best. And this is really sweet for me to be here today. So many good memories of being mayor, being with the league and being part of this. And just know if there's one guy that knows how important what you do is, it's me. And I haven't forgotten that the real work in our state happens in our cities. Counties, okay, but but in our cities. So thank you all for your service. Mayor, thank you. I won't interrupt too long, but I would love just to share a few thoughts with you. Hi, Clark. Clark and I played baseball back in East Mill Creek. He's a lot older than I am. Just a couple of quick top line things, and then I think we have time for questions. So I'll look to Cameron. By the way, Cameron's the best, isn't he? And the team. What good hands that you guys are all in. Where'd he go? There he is. And it's good to see so much of the same team here back when I was here. So if I just think quickly through the state, I want you to know we're thinking about Northern Corridor. I want you to know we're thinking about monuments. the size of monuments, what's the right size of monuments. We're thinking about locality pay at Hill Air Force Base. We came so close to getting something substantial done there. We're thinking about water, and how we can assist you. Forest fires actually have a bill right now. It's a major piece of legislation we're really excited about, supported by 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, that would radically change the way we're managing our forest. You guys are all in an era now where you're worried about forest fires in February. And so we've got a major piece of legislation that we're working on that. We have what I would call an embarrassing amount of success with, for lack of better words, earmarks. And I just want you all to know that we want to be very in tune with the needs in your communities and how I and my team can specifically help. And sometimes it's legislation, sometimes it's actual financially. So if you have issues or needs that you want to bring to our attention, please make sure that you do. We have an outreach program where we have 6 different outreach people that work for me that should be in your meetings and in your communities. If you don't know who they are, where's Jenny? Jenny is back there. Most of you know Mayor Jenny Reese, who works for me. If you don't know who your outreach person is, will you touch base? And if they're not coming to your meetings, they need to be coming to your meetings and understanding. And that's the best way to filter up how we can be helping with some of these infrastructure projects and other projects that you have. We did millions of dollars that we were able to bring to the state last year. And I say it that way because there's a little bit of stress on this whole relationship between that. But I'm going to make you a promise. The day that the federal government stops taking money from you, I'll stop asking for it back. Is that a deal? Yes, and we're actually very good at that, so we want to help you with that. We also have an extensive team that does what we call casework. So if you have constituents that are dealing with anything that interfaces with the federal government and they're having problems, have them call my office. That could be the IRS, it could be Social Security, it could be immigration and visa status. We deal with visas all day long, and we've got a teamwork that's really, really good at that. And so please know that you have that resource for you as well. So we do some questions. Have you got hard questions for me? What questions do you have for me? Other than why did I live being a mayor? I miss it. Yes. How's the legislature doing to you this year? You playing defense every day? Don't you love that they tell me to stay out of their life and then they feel like they can tell you what to do?
Thank you for being here, Senator Curtis. Corey Holdaway. I just had a quick question about the Colorado Compact and
Yes.
the water there and how involved you've been with that.
Yeah, so when I first came in, that was one of the first things that we jumped into. The state has been very, very clear. They want to negotiate this deal. And so they've asked the federal delegation to kind of stay on the sidelines while they negotiate it. So we meet frequently as senators and talk about it, but we're kind of waiting for direction from the state. As you know, the states are struggling to come to an agreement. What we don't want is a political answer. What we want is a realistic answer. It very could well be that the Department of Interior actually weighs in and mandates an answer, which wouldn't be all bad for Utah, but that's kind of the status right now. And then we'll codify whatever the states come up with in law. I can't believe this group doesn't have questions. I'm riding my bike with your city. What other questions do you have? How can we help you? What are you hearing that you would like me to know about? I'll tell you, there's kind of this drumbeat I'm hearing of affordability housing, and we are working on a couple of pieces of legislation and trying to be supportive of the state as well. Hey, how are you?
Doing well.
Good to see you.
Good to have you here. Thank you so much for the service that you do for our country. CVDG is a program that our community relies big time. What protections, if so, hopefully, do we have a commitment maybe from you or other members of the delegation about protecting this program?
Yeah, so let's talk about the overall federal budget for just a minute and how it impacts all of you. No surprise, we don't have a balanced budget. We're spending far more than we're bringing in. The deficit, as everybody knows, is skyrocketing. And then on top of that, the country elected a disruptor. last November. And you combine all those things together, and there's a lot of uneasiness in these federal programs that have always been there. And so I can tell you, as a former mayor, it's very easy for me to see which ones are valuable, impactful, and actually a good return on the tax dollar. And I think that certainly falls into that category. And that's where the mayor's hat is helpful. And I would say to all of you, these programs that are very important to you, right now, it's one of the most valuable things that all of you can be doing is making sure there is no waste in them. And therefore, they don't go under that scrutiny, if that makes sense. Everything, quite frankly, is going through right now.
Senator, I've got a couple of questions for you coming from online.
Okay.
And when you were league president, we didn't have the online capacity. We started that up when,
So just
when you were
to
here.
make you feel bad, I was mayor before COVID. I was mayor before a lot of these, social media. Like when I ran for mayor, my team had to convince me to go sign up for Facebook. That tells you how old I am.
Right. Well, the great news is because of our technology, we have 270
That's awesome.
league members around the state that are participating right now. So there are several questions from Councilmember Wright in Eagle Mountain to Matt Brower in Heber to Aaron Wells, the city manager in Highland, all talking about Olympics, transportation funding, Heber Valley Railroad, and by extension, also a question from Mayor Wright and Tory about gateway communities. So the world is welcome here. It's not just the Olympics, it's everything else. Take that and run with it.
Yeah, so the committee, Brad Wilson and Kelsey, I think you all know them well, have been deeply engaged with our office. Andrew has been deeply engaged on this. This won't surprise you. We get a number of people coming to our office and saying, for the Olympics, we need this. And that's really hard for us to deal with. We're trying to funnel that up through one state ask. Does that make sense? So that we can focus, laser in focus on how to help the state. We specifically picked, we being me and my team, some of the committees so that we could be helpful for the Olympics, both with transportation, security, and the other things. So this is a really good opportunity to do some long-term things for the state that are healthy. If you have things that you want the Olympic Committee to consider, please be communicating with them right now to get them as a priority. If you have things, projects that might be nice for the Olympics but don't necessarily fit within their framework, bubble those up as well, but just realize they probably are not going to fall under that same Olympics title, if that makes sense, that we want to be talking about. Getting this right is really important to all of us. And I think part of getting this right is realizing the world's going to be looking. We are going to grow as a result of this, as we did last time. How are we going to do that? So much of that falls on all of your shoulders. Hello, Mayor.
Hello, thank you. Senator, thanks for joining us. It's fun to have you back. And you always wear your mayor hat.
And I think last time I was here, Lynn Pace was standing against that wall.
Some
right there.
things change,
and I don't
some
think he's
things
changed.
never change.
No, I don't
Yes.
think he's changed either.
Indeed. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing. And maybe you could tell people a little bit about EPW and about transportation funding specifically. You've done quite a bit of work. Your staff's been involved. You've been involved. Just wondered if
Good.
you had anything you'd like to share and say thank you to you for that work.
So just quickly, EPW is Environment and Public Works. So I am on that committee. The way things worked out really well. I'm now third in seniority from the top of that committee. That is a committee that will fund a lot of your public infrastructure, if that makes sense. It's really a nice tandem committee to Senator Lee's Energy and Resources, which he now chairs. Those may be the two most important committees for Utah. So we positioned ourselves on that. We're also on a commerce. Much of the transportation also comes through things like the regulations for autonomous vehicles and these flight vehicles that we're looking at all goes through that committee as well. And so we're on that, and we're also on foreign relations. All of those committees were picked specifically to know exactly how to help all of you on the ground with your projects. So EPW, everything from water, streams, chemicals, and some of your transportation things, and then commerce, also your transportation things. And I've got, as most of you that interact with my staff know, we just got a Class A staff all across the board on all these topics as well. There's another thing that doesn't change. That's probably right where you were standing last time too. And Sean was sitting right there. Is that it? I will just tell you while they're looking, if you find yourself in Washington, please give us some advance notice. We would love to make sure that you're having a good experience there, whether it's meeting with me and my staff, touring the Capitol or anything like that. We just know when mayors come, we try to stop what we're doing and make it a special experience for you. Not just mayors, council members and administrators. Thank you to all of you for the amazing work that you do.
So Senator, these will be our last couple of questions. The first question is from Logan about healthcare costs. And the second question is from Conwood Heights about Great Salt Lake.
So healthcare costs, like we could go a lot of different directions
easy.
than that. But let me just say this. In the big, beautiful bill, there was a lot of conversation about Medicaid. And right now, if you look at the single biggest budget buster we have, it's Medicaid. And if you go back to COVID, President Biden put some increases in Medicaid that just simply are not sustainable. Plus, if you go back to Medicaid expansion, think about this. We're compensating states 90%, and the states are paying 10% on the expansion. Pre-expansion, it was more like 60-40. So states have no motivation if you're only paying 10% to move people off of the rolls. As a matter of fact, they do something that's called provider taxes, and in many cases, we're compensating at 105% of the cost. So guess what? States aren't moving people off. So we came up with some new rules. And one of those rules is if you don't work, you don't get Medicaid. Now, we understand there's a lot of situations where people can't work. So we exempted anybody with disabilities. We exempted anybody with young children. We exempted students. We exempted seniors. Almost any category that you can think of where maybe somebody shouldn't be working. But I'm telling you what, if you're 30 years and you're sitting at home on your mom's couch and saying, I'm gonna make everybody else pay for my health insurance, that game is over. And that was critical to bend our spending curve. This year, for the first time since I've been in Washington, D.C., we did 95% of our appropriations. Now, we got that tiny little bit left to get over, which is the fight on Homeland and DHS right now. But that was amazing. And we did it at a funding level less than last year. So while we do need to reduce more money, we actually, for the first time, budgeted less money than the year before, did our budgeting and didn't end up with an omnibus. So it's a big deal. And we did that, quite frankly, by cutting back not on Medicaid, but the increase in cost on Medicaid. And so this is important as you go into your communities and people say, they're cutting away this critical Medicaid for me and my Down syndrome son. That is not true. We're taking it away from that 30-year-old guy that doesn't want to work, so the money is there for you and your Down syndrome child. Does that make sense? And then there's this other big narrative about the cost of insurance. During COVID, President Biden put extra money into reimbursing the cost of insurance. Guess what happened when he did that? Cost of insurance went up by about the same amount as the supplement. Surprise, right? So now that has expired, all of a sudden insurance is much higher. So one answer is just to throw a lot of money at it. The other is to say, let's look at the cost. Why is it so expensive? And what can we do to bring it down? And that's the debate that's happening in Washington. How do we change these principles instead of just throwing money? You can't do that as cities, right? At everything, that we actually change the fundamental things underneath. And that's a 5-minute part of a healthcare discussion that actually really needs an hour. The second question was, or is that it? Oh, the Great Salt Lake. Yeah, so this is another area where it's really important for us as a federal delegation to understand our lane. It would be a mistake for the federal delegation to come and say, here are the answers for the Great Salt Lake. What we're asking is the state to say, here are the answers, here's the help we need. So we are prepared. We've done some legislation. We're also prepared from a financial perspective to be part of it. But I think it's fair to say the entire delegation is watching and just kind of waiting for our marching orders from the state, which, by the way, I think is actually doing a really good job with it. So listen, this is the best. Should we make this an annual thing where I get invited back, Cameron? Please know there's so much respect for what you do. Look forward to working with all of you and seeing all of you. Thanks for carving out just a couple of minutes for me today, and go fight win.
Do you want to do your highs and lows?
Oh, yeah. Could you guys help me? So Cameron, come here.
This was my.
Well, we asked Cameron, we said,
Specific ask from Cameron.
this is an ask for Cameron. You know, I do highs and lows every week. And Cameron said, well, wouldn't it be cool if you were my high? Well, here's the problem. Sunday, I flew on a C-17 with a nuclear reactor. You're competing against that. So we're going to do 2 highs this week, but we want to film it with you. Is that okay? So Cameron, you come stand. Dylan, what do you want us to do? Do you want me to hold it? Okay, we're going to selfie and I'll do my
Something like
highs.
that.
Let's see how many of you we can get in. Okay, then you guys have to be really loud, all right, at the end. Okay? You can do that? Okay, I'm doing my highs and lows today from the Utah Capitol. On my left here is Cameron, who runs the league at Season Towns, and I just got to tell you,
Thanks, appreciate it.
Dylan, did we do okay? Do you want to retake?
Perfect. Well, thank you, Senator. And once a mayor, always a mayor. And when he said that he makes the time worthwhile when you visit with him in Washington, D.C. and here in Utah, he means it. We meet with him every year in the spring as part of the National League of Cities. We've had some tremendous opportunities with him and his staff, both touring the Capitol and doing business on behalf of the state. So thank you, Senator. He mentioned Jenny Reese, who's his primary contact here locally, former mayor of Cedar Hills. We put her contact information in the chat room for those of you online. Her contact information is Jenny, Jenney _ Reese, REES at curtis.senate.gov. And we'll have that in our follow-up materials and we post it in the chat room. So thank you again, Senator, and thanks for your time. Okay, let's jump back into it because we got a lot to do over the next hour or so. Carson, let's set up where we're at on all the economic development and tax increment financing bills.
I have to bring the slides back up here. All right, so not only do I get to follow Senator Curtis, but I get to follow talking about a bunch of complicated tax increment bills. So that's excellent. But no, so this year, all jokes aside, there are a lot of bills in this space, not only around tax increment, but around economic development, around infrastructure funding, around special districts. And there's a couple different reasons for that. First, I think there's a lot of concern in the property tax space that's bled over into tax increment. Obviously, tax increment pulls money away temporarily from other taxing entities, so that creates concerns about those entities' budgets. There's been concerns about transparency process where the average citizen can go and find information on how much money is being invested in tax increment projects. And then there's also the perennial concern about the but-for analysis. As long as I've been up here, there's been conversations about the but-for analysis and ensuring that the public is benefiting as much as the entities receiving tax increment. So there's been, you see this kind of alphabet soup here, and I'll mention the slides we're about to talk about, all these bills have been in fairly constant flux since they came out a couple weeks ago. We're still positioned pending on several of them. Many of them are being reconsolidated, and I'll talk about that in a moment here. But first, we wanted to talk about House Bill 507, which I'll let Cameron do. House Bill 507 is a pretty significant bill to overhaul how the state is creating tools for tax increment financing, and I'll let Cameron explain that.
Perfect. Thanks, Carson. So this is one of several bills. All of the other bills are in the space of existing tools. This bill is in the space of creating a new tax increment financing tool, a city or county initiated tool. It would create what is called a regionally significant development zone. So again, city or county initiated, where if you met certain criteria that is not yet in the bill. So I'm sparing you the question of like, what does it mean to be regionally significant? That was part of our dialogue Friday night. Still working out that exact criteria. But if you have that regionally significant project area, then the city or county initiates the zone, okay? Then you can use the increment to pay for the infrastructure to support that development. And then there would be subcategories that mirror the existing HTRZ, the existing FIZ, and the existing sports zone. It sunsets the HOPS, it sunsets those other zones I just described, reconstitutes some of them, but under the banner of the regionally significant zone, okay? It would follow an HTRZ style framework. And right now we have some really good success stories of HTRZs. The framework of an HTRZ compared to a traditional CRA is how the tax increment is ultimately collected and allocated. So in a normal tax increment financing tool through a traditional CRA, Cameron City would go to Carson School District and to Roger County, and we'd work out an agreement of what the tax increment should be, what that amount should be, for how long, and then once we come to that agreement, then you can start issuing bonds against that tax increment to pay for the infrastructure. The HTRZ framework, which again has been successful thus far at facilitating some large-scale projects near transit stops, brings those local entities together, but also includes state legislative representation. And then if you meet certain criteria spelled out in statute, then that committee then automatically triggers the collection of tax increment up to a certain percentage, okay? So the different taxing entities are on the committee, but ultimately, if the will of the committee is to go forward with that project, then the committee could outvote, say, minority voices on that committee. So right now, that HTRZ framework has been used successfully for several HTRZs around the Wasatch Front. And the idea would be to take that framework and apply it to the regionally significant development zone, with conversation still ongoing about those ultimate definitions. There's also in this bill language about a state infrastructure fund for redevelopment and for investment in large-scale state infrastructure. So think large-scale electric transmission lines or other types of large-scale infrastructure. So if a community of Cameron City wanted to use a HB 507 tool, you'd be using this 507 tool for a really large-scale project, and then a portion of the increment would go to the state in their infrastructure fund to be used for that large-scale infrastructure. If a city doesn't want to go through the 507 process, you don't have to, but it would create that HTRZ style approach. The second thing that it does is, well, actually, I skipped number 2. I hit number 3 and number 4. The bill also has clarifying language around PIDs. This gets to the objective that Carson was just articulating, that there's a lot of concern about PIDs and about the process and transparency around PIDs, as well as the process and transparency around tax increment financing. This bill's trying to address several of those things as well. So right now, our recommendation is position pending because the first draft of the bill is out, but a substitute is coming. Again, we were working on it Friday night with the bill sponsor. And so at this point, we're working toward support of the tool because it's an optional tool for cities in these limited circumstances, but recognizing there's still details to be worked out over the next few days. So we wanted to just give you situational awareness today because the other bills Carson's going to talk about are all focused on the existing tools. This would be authorizing a new tool. Thought I saw Mill Creek in the back. Yep, go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, why are we sunsetting hops when it's only existed for like 2 years?
Yeah.
I mean, Mill Creek is currently working on a program, some legislation about
Yep.
hops. I don't understand why the state wants to make stuff and then kill it 2 years later before cities really had a chance to even do anything with it.
Yeah, it's a good question. And actually, one of our asks from today's meeting is that if your city is in the process of looking at a hops, fizz, or HTRZ, to let us know so we can figure out what that list looks like. So we can have that conversation with Representative Roberts. Part of the answer to your question, Councilmember, is that there's angst on the other side of the complex here of too many specialty tools, and instead consolidating the specialty tools into a more refined approach. There's a concern from other taxing entities about all of the different tax increment tools that are out there. And for example, a hops has a cap on the amount of acreage that a hops can do within a particular school district. We actually negotiated that in because we were trying to make sure that they were being targeted at the right places and not just kind of open season anywhere. But the cap in a hops is different than the caps in the HTRZ. And so part of the dialogue that I'm anticipating after this session in the interim is that broader conversation about the scope of tax increment that is being utilized in all the different tools. So it is not the intent to stop cities from using tax increment. It's to say, have we gotten too big? Do we need to narrow it down? And that's why part of the ask from us is there's not been a single hops created to its fruition, but there are several communities we know of, including Mill Creek, that have been looking at it. So if anybody's looking at a hops, fizz, or HTRZ, please let us know today, because that'll be part of the conversation about how all these pieces come together. We'll also have a Slido question specifically about large load, because that also ties into this. As part of the conversation has been, we have Senator Sandel's bill on large load. We have this bill targeting regionally significant. There's overlap between those two things. How do these pieces fit together? And right now we need as much data from you as possible to inform those dialogues over the next few days. Any other questions on this one before I give it back to Carson? Okay, Carson.
Awesome. So like I mentioned, everything's kind of in flux. We're still expecting some possible changes or definite changes to House Bill 507. So yeah, please let us know. Take a look at the bill. House Bill 427. So with the rest of the tax increment bills, there's kind of two clear categories that emerge. There's those provisions that are trying to address the disclosure side of transparency. So when you create them, is all the information and all the documentation available in one place? House Bill 427 is really focused on that piece. And there's this bill is going to be largely moved to another bill that I'll talk about in a moment. But the general concept is with this bill is to first, whenever you're going to use tax increment, whether it's creating a new project area, whether it would be creating an HTRZ, the general, and this applies to state land use authorities as well, but the general idea is to say, you're already going through some kind of authorization meeting. So the definition here is a little bit clunky, but the gist of it is you're already approving it at the council level or the board level. So that information's already there. It adds more clarity to a but-for test, which is not really defined in code, and it defines proportionate benefit test. This has been one of the biggest sticking points where you'd have to demonstrate that over a 40-year period, the increment is going to generate more, the project is going to generate more revenue than the increment you invested in it. And as many people have pointed out, oftentimes the benefit of a project area includes public amenities and other benefits to the community that are less quantifiable. So this has been a provision there's been a lot of dialogue on. The bill, as it's written, would have you apply to GOEO. The intent here, and I think many of us have read this differently, but the intent here is that as you would report in a database, when you create a project area, you're providing this information, and it's supposed to be sort of an objective completeness review. So it's not necessarily intending to give GOEO the ability to substantively review your projects and determine whether they're good or they should be approved. It was really just intended to be sort of a check the box, is all the information available. So that's the gist of it. Again, I won't spend a ton of time on this because it's being moved over to another bill, but the objective is better disclosure of tax increment use. So are there any questions there?
Thank you. Quickly, who's driving this legislation? Is it developers as well too, or is it some cities requesting?
So Representative Walter just felt like a lot of the information around tax increment wasn't all easily accessible. So there was a project in his area that he was trying to find some documents for. The project had been authorized 10 or 15 years ago, and they had just started triggering it recently. But the information, like the original minutes, some of the analysis that had been performed originally was not super available. He had to look through bond documents. So that was this wasn't, I don't know, this was spawned by any individual group. It was really just him trying to say, like, the information's all out there. Let's try to consolidate it and let's try to identify a clear standard to show that we're using tax increment prudently. Yeah. So the question was, does the bill include provisions for creation of a tax increment district? Is that correct?
So the question is, does 427 concern itself with creation of a TIF district or execution of interlocal agreements?
So it wouldn't necessarily apply to interlocal agreements unless that was part of the tax increment. But when you're creating the new project area, that's when this would apply. And there's been some policy conversations around ensuring that it's prospective. I'll add that there's been a lot of work just trying to corral all these different tax increment policies into one single bill to have a more comprehensive policy conversation about them. But we haven't really had a lot of that substantive discussion yet, or at least it's been sort of siloed. All right, and I want to give a shout out to the Utah Redevelopment Association. They've also been instrumental in all these conversations and helping herd cats in this space. So they've been closely involved. Rob Sant and Danny Walls have been in many, many meetings as usual. But I want to give them a shout out for all their work on these as well. All right. So Senate Bill 221, this bill is focused more on housing and transit reinvestment zones. Most of this bill is not particularly concerning. There is one piece, though, around requiring a local government. So if you create a housing and transit reinvestment zone, you have to meet certain objectives for housing when you apply. This bill is trying to, in part, answer a question of what happens if the entity does not go through with the intended land use planning for that project area. So this bill does have some concerning language that we're still working with some other stakeholders on to address that. But right now it would require it basically sets a floor for that project area once you've applied and the project has been approved, that you could not reduce the zoning beneath that floor. There's also some maybe mildly concerning language about amending HTRZs, but again, there's a lot of technical changes in this bill. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because now HTRZs are sort of looking, House Bill 507 is contemplating sunsetting HTRZs, not existing ones, but new ones beginning in 2028. So there's a lot of changes to HTRZs. If your community is currently, these would be prospective again. So if your community is looking at doing an HTRZ, take a look at this bill. If this causes you concern, please let us know. One other piece is the first home investment zone, the FIZ, allows you to actually include extraterritorial housing towards your housing objectives. This bill would add that provision for the HTRZ as well. So that's kind of an interesting piece. I don't know if any projects are currently looking at that. All right, Senate Bill 228. This originally had sort of the other side of the transparency around tax increment in it. That's been removed in the substitute. So now Senate Bill 228 is really just dealing with dormancy periods. So what the bill would say, rather than a dormancy period of 5 years like we have now, it would create a dormancy period after the project area has lapsed for 6 months. It could be extended for up to 2 years one time. But the intent behind this bill is to say we have a bunch of we have multiple dormant project areas that aren't collecting anymore. They're not being used anymore. It's causing some issues with county assessors trying to keep track of all of them as we have new project areas coming online. So the intent is just to say, shorten that dormancy period. So once you've finished collecting and using TIF, you have 6 months. You can extend it if you need a little bit longer to finish some stuff up, but then it's done. So again, all the transparency provisions have been pulled out of this and moved into another bill, but that's really the substance that's left in 228. Any questions? Yeah.
There was a proportionate refund provision in that bill. Is it still in the bill?
I believe so, but I think that's fairly similar to what's in current code that you have to refund if you receive extra tax increment.
Is there any discussion or has there been any thought about exempting from that refund housing allocation funds or at a minimum allocated housing allocation funds?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that there's been at least I haven't been part of conversation to that effect around this bill. Again, most of the substantive conversations still lagging as we're trying to get all the organizational pieces in, but I think that's a good point, Todd. All right, so this is some of you saw a previous iteration of this slide, but Senate Bill 206 is going to be the landing spot for all of these different tax increment pieces. So I tried to identify House Bill 427, the notice disclosure pieces are moving into this bill. It's not the substitute that has all these changes is not public yet, but I guess it will be probably by the end of the day or early tomorrow morning. So yeah, notice disclosure from 427. 427 is probably just going to cease and all those provisions move over there. Representative Walters, now the floor sponsor on Senate Bill 206. Senate Bill 228, the reporting provisions already been moved over. And then House Bill 461, which I didn't really mention because that's focused on state land use authority reporting. So it's not including CRAs, sort of the same intent of better reporting, more detailed information. That bill is going to be moved in and merged into 206 as well. And then the reporting provisions of 507, we anticipate in 206 as the landing spot. So the other important thing is that 206 is going to change the reporting entity or the reporting destination. Right now, CRAs, anybody collecting tax increment has to report annually to GOEO, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. They maintain a database. There's been a little bit of a rocky road, but to my knowledge, almost all entities are compliant. So it's going to move that to what's going to be called the stats system. So that is formerly known as MCAT, which is the Multi-County Appraisal Trust System. So that system is going to be expanded to include more reporting tools, with the idea being that project areas will be able to, or I guess the CRAs, the agencies will be able to have access to that. That'll help them better track tax increment. That'll better help them track changes in valuation. So basically trying to merge all the assessor data and tax increment data into the same place. This slide's a little bit light on details because we're still only seeing a protected version of the bill, but once the bill is public, we'll do a more comprehensive analysis and have its own breakout slide for LPC next time. So again, a lot of interest in disclosure, a lot of interest in reporting. We're working closely with the Redevelopment Association, with other stakeholders to make sure that it's not creating an overly burdensome process. I think the goal is to try to just replicate as many of the best practices on reporting that we're doing now, and just making sure that that's consistent. It's all available in the same spot, and ideally be able to come out with a better reporting system than we have now. So recognizing that's a lot of information without a lot of detail, are there any questions? All right, well, if you have any questions or if you want to be more involved, please let me know. I'm happy to loop you in. And we're still working on substantive changes on many of these bills, so we'll keep you posted. Then the last bill in the economic development space I want to mention is Senate Bill 231. The language in this bill is kind of clunky as it is, but the intent behind this bill is to say for a large load project, which is very loosely defined, you'll see the definition in a moment, but for a large load project, the sort of goal being data centers, but the definition as we interpret it could apply to heavy industrial facilities that use a lot of electricity as well. The intent is to say to prevent a race to the bottom for trying to incentivize those, and to try to say we think that these projects, which could create costs elsewhere in the energy infrastructure that we have statewide, to try to create some kind of statewide shared benefit with other entities. So that's concerning for those of you who might give tax increment to data centers. But we're still trying to work through some alternative concepts here as well, because this doesn't really, the way it's written is challenging to, I think, interpret and implement. Plus the bit of a preemption on limiting how much tax increment you can give to a data center, and then trying to redistribute some of that money is problematic as well.
Does this apply to existing heavy load users, or would it just be moving forward?
The way I've read it, it's moving forward, but I don't think there's any like clear date that, yeah. So I'm going to ask a quick question because we want to know how big this universe is. And this is that really unclear definition that I mentioned before. So the question we're hoping to answer, just because we want to know how many cities, or if you're involved, want to loop you in, how many cities are looking at offering tax increment or other similar incentives to a data center or industrial facility that requests electric service under a large-scale service request or enters into a private generation contract with a large-scale service provider. I don't actually know what that definition really means. That's the definition in state code. Really what we're trying to figure out is if you're trying to give tax increment to invest in a project area that could support a data center or a major industrial facility.
Carson, do you want us to say yes if we're involved in a taxing entity that is doing this already as well, or just the city proper?
Sure, yeah, if you're involved with the taxing entity. Yeah, we're just trying to, again, figure out what the universe is. When we started talking about this bill, most of the conversations were in the unincorporated county level. That's where we're starting to see more of these really large data center complexes being located or at least being planned. So we know that there's some municipalities looking at doing this, but we don't know that whole universe. So that's what we're trying to diagnose. All right, well, I'll leave this up for just another minute before we go to a more exciting topic of homelessness. All right, let's see if we can get to 150. All right, so yeah, if you have any questions about any of these bills, I know a lot in flux. That was kind of a vague, not overly detailed explanation of any of these, but that's intentional. Please let me know if you'd like to be looped in. Thanks.
Cool beans. Okay. Plugging along. We still do not have the bill that we were anticipating from Representative Elison. We are aware of some of the concepts, but we're going to kind of run through the current landscape and just know that the conversation that we have been prepping to have, we will still prepare to have. Again, we're still in a bit of uncertainty of whether or not a transformative central campus is coming online. A lot of the momentum seems to be saying no, but I know there's still quite a few powerful folks who are feeling like that is a good solution. I'll go back to those. So two bills that are out right now that we want to flag. One is Senator Escamilla's State Homeless Campus Neighbor Tax Credit. If you're on the daily briefing this morning, this came up. It will be in committee this afternoon. There was some confusion about the bill. It spoke to an income tax credit. It also spoke to your property tax bill. And we were a little concerned about the potential precedent it would set that if any adjacent property to a kind of difficult land use could get a property tax exemption, what type that policy would set. This does not do that. It is a income tax credit that is based on your property tax bill. So it is state dollars. It's still focused on kind of any central campus that comes online. The language for what a campus is a little expansive, so we're going to work with the bill sponsor on that. But otherwise, it's just something to kind of be aware of. And again, if a campus never happens, then this bill will never happen. We also have one of the two bills that we were anticipating from Representative Elison. For those of you who have followed some of the conversations around homelessness more broadly from the criminal justice perspective, Salt Lake County has been working really hard to get to what they're calling the sequential intercept model or the Miami-Dade model. And that is providing essentially diversions for folks who interact with the criminal justice system to get the type of help they need. Not everyone who interacts with the criminal justice system necessarily needs to go to jail or housing or the pieces they need. Sometimes folks need to be said, you know, you're going to go to treatment. whether that's mental health treatment, behavioral health treatment, those pieces. So this is really working to lay the groundwork for getting folks where they need to go that isn't just jail or isn't just released. This will require a bit more coordination and training for your public safety officers. We're still working to fully understand what this does. By and large, it's going to predominantly impact counties. So we'll keep an eye on this moving forward. And then the bill that we don't have yet. There are a few provisions that we are anticipating from Representative Ellison's bill. There are two pretty big land use provisions. One is that it overrides the conditional use permit capacity in existing shelters. So if you have a shelter in your community, you no longer get to determine what that capacity is for your conditional use permit. The state gets to determine the capacity of your shelter. The second is that it overrides, it authorizes DFCM to use any state-owned facilities as a homeless shelter. This is really targeted at one specific facility. And so we are working on that. Second, it still, in our conversations with the bill sponsor, he still wants to make the mitigation changes that we discussed last week of trying to tie them more to the impact of the system, having a bit more of a floating rate similar to what you might see with a property tax with meaningful offsets. However, that policy is not outlined in code. It is outlined, he anticipates being created an administrative rule. That is the same for the distributions to other cities as well. The one thing that we are anticipating seeing in code is that there would be an absolute contribution cap of $500,000 or 5%. That said, again, that's not what the rate would be. That would just be similar to how property tax has like a maximum mill levy that you could impose. It's kind of saying the most that you could ever pay would be this. Still a very high number, and we're going to work on that. He's also working to get more upstream interventions at the county level. Representative Clancy has a bill to increase the tobacco tax. This would create a matching grant fund where counties could put up kind of dollar for dollar to access those state monies and create housing interventions within their jurisdictions or crisis shelter, things of that nature. And then the final is that it changes some of the Code Blue provisions to be contemplated in administrative rule rather than in statute. In a setting where there's already a lot of uncertainty surrounding property tax, the water rates, whatever else is going on up here, amid the uncertainty of campus, no campus, based on the folks I've spoken with so far, there's a lot of discomfort with even more uncertainty of policies being put into administrative rule. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. So if I can go back to our two Slido questions. The first is going back to our conversation last week, where we were kind of discussing what a mitigation shift could look like. How comfortable are you with a system like that? Which is to say, there's a value ascribed to each bed in the system, and the fund grows or shrinks depending on the number of beds, and you receive offsets depending on what you have in your community. If there's questions about that, raise your hand and we can kind of clarify, but it's the concept that we spent some time discussing last week. Okay. I'm going to give it just one more second, then we're going to jump to the next one. So the second question, how do you feel about the mitigation policies being made via administrative rule rather than laid out in code? Is that something that you're comfortable with, uncomfortable with? So that's a great question, Kate. She should be our president or something. So the way that our understanding is now, it would be rules created by the Office of Homeless Services in consultation with the League Board of Directors to be approved by the Utah Homeless Services Board. Because who doesn't love bureaucracy? All right, excellent. With that said, I know we've got a pretty stacked agenda, so we'll hand it over to Reverend Tex.
Okay, everybody, shake out a little bit. Shake out a little bit. Yeah, we got intense stuff here. As Justin indicated, we're already basically at the record number of bills, and they are on track to be about 20% ahead of where they were last year. So unfortunately, that also means we need 20% more League Army. That means we need 20% more time on feedback of bills. So we're asking, we're not getting kicked out of this room at 2. So we're asking you to stick with us to 1:45 so we can hit a few more of these bills. Okay. Let's talk rev and tax. Now, Mayor Palmer, Roger Tu and I spent the morning with Senator McKay talking through the potential substitute to his SB 97. It's not out yet. Okay. So we don't have anything to present to you yet. But as we were fleshing out the different policy ideas, I think it's fair to say, and Mayor Palmer and Roger, actually, do you mind if I just put you on the spot, Mayor, and you just kind of give your 2 cents on where you think the senator is at right now from a policy priority perspective?
I mean, first I'll say that he feels like he has to do something. Right? He feels like he's getting a lot of pressure. He's even been in meetings where there's a talk of an initiative coming to abolish property tax, which scares him because that would destroy everything, right? So he's feeling the pressure to do something, right? So he's worried about the new growth. We're trying to hone in on the new growth aspect of that and how to deal with that, as well as
fund balance.
Oh yeah, fund balance. Trying to find he's worried that cities are stashing money away in a slush fund type of, and then taking, and again, it's just to him, he understands it, and that's what I will say. Senator McKay is an ally in this. He really is. He's been an ally in this space, but he's trying to fix the public perception around property tax as well. So he's trying to find something that politically quiets the crowd, I guess you could say, if that's a fair way to say it.
Roger, is there anything else you want to add as Mike brings the mic over? I think it's fair in your mind right now. I'm asking you to put SB 97 in like this policy space of trying to address concerns around fund balances and new growth. And then we're going to talk about Representative Karen Peterson's bill and some of the other bills that are in the process space. And then the third category is all of the bills that are in the, what we'll call the anti-property tax space. Okay. So those are the 3 buckets that they've coalesced around a month into the session. Roger, anything else on the McKay front?
Well, he's been a little bit all over the map on this bill. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that I don't think he's trying to blow the property tax system up.
Okay, cool.
He's not trying to blow the property tax system up. He's a fan. He wants to save it. Although I spent a lot of time getting him to be a fan. I'm not saying that point. I think he's not interested in the caps part of that anymore. I think he's going to get rid of his dalliance with the residential exemption. I think he feels really strongly about the fund balance issue. And I think there is a legitimate argument about how much money should be kept out of the system in fund balance. So I think he feels really strongly on that. On new growth, I think he wants to fix something. I just have some distance of agreement that it's as big an issue, but that's sort of how I rank those issues, Cam.
Perfect. So we're expecting a new sub. So right now our recommendation is position pending on whatever that new sub is. And we have been sharing with Senator McKay and other legislators the feedback from this group over the last few weeks. Thank you, by the way, to the 91 cities that had sent us information about your fund balances. That was in partnership. Thank you, Seth, for sending it out to the UCMA listserv, and then also the feedback from LPC. So we actually have a list of where 91 cities are in the fund balance space. That's been a helpful point of discussion. So our goal today is not to rehash the same policy discussions that we've had over the last few weeks. Instead, our goal is, I'm going to actually give you a second to think about this. is to give you a chance via Slido to look at all the different policy ideas that are currently on the table and rank them from least concerning at the top to most concerning at the bottom. Because right now, up to this point, we've asked you this question, what do you think about this as a standalone, and this as a standalone, and this as a standalone? So now, as you look at everything in that policy space, is there anything in there where you say, okay, well, as I look at these three different things, this one's actually less concerning in the context of everything? Yeah. Now, as you're opening this up, we're going to give you a second to do this. I will just walk through what the 9 are, and you can be answering as we proceed. But please take the time to answer this. Least concerning at the top. Okay, least concerning at the top. So the bigger number is more concerning. Least concerning at the top. So changing the timing of new growth to the 100% completion. We talked about this last week. Got great feedback from you via another Slido question, which we shared with him. Changing the definition of new growth to focus on new buildable area. Again, you guys gave us great feedback on that. He's got his reasons why he wants to do it. The Association of Counties is involved in these conversations on new growth, but we want to see how this compares elsewhere. Adjust down the certified tax rate by the amount of interest that fund balances are accruing. We got some great data from the city managers on Friday about the dollars and cents and how much this would actually mean. Our point back to the senator this morning was that if you didn't allow us to just use that interest, you're going to create a scenario where the city's going to have to raise taxes because they're not getting the value of that interest. He acknowledged that point. He was trying to get at this issue of, do we have too much in fund balance, and are we creating an incentive to have more in fund balance, and then people are relying on that interest instead of having less in fund balance and spending that money on a more regular basis. Now, a couple of things that are going to be on this list that are new from our conversations in the last couple of days. First with Mayor Walker, because Mayor Walker and I met with Senator McKay last Thursday, and then Mayor Palmer again this morning. Senator McKay wanted to know if we were interested in making changes to the truth in taxation notice. Because right now, that notice tells you how much your property's worth and how much you're paying in taxes, both last year and this year. So he said, well, what if we put additional information on there to inform the public how much they're paying on average in income tax and all sales taxes? In his mind, that would reduce the rage around property tax if you can see in context that you're actually paying less in property tax than you are in these other taxes. I'm not saying that'll be the outcome, but that was his thought process of trying to make the notice more educational and not as inflammatory. This is really the first time in years we've had a legislator who's willing to look at the notice. Okay, so whether it's that mechanism, whether it's that exact context or something else, I think that's a worthwhile conversation around the notice. And then there are pieces in there we've talked about before about restricting property tax revenue from going in reserves or capping the amount of capital project fund reserves. Any follow-up questions about the list?
There's a clarifying question, is if there has been any amount of time provided to transition from a fund balance.
Yeah, we talked about that this morning too, that nobody wants a scenario where the legislature changes the law today and then a city that has been following the law but is above the new that new amount now has to make a decision of what to do with that fund balance. I can tell you there's been discussion upstairs about requiring that in some form of refund back to the taxpayer. We've said if we're gonna adjust fund balances, there needs to be a more thoughtful approach. So the reason this will be helpful to us is when the league officers and league staff are chatting about property tax every day, and we came to a conclusion basically on Thursdays, we were having some of these meetings with legislators, like there are all these ideas out there. Nobody really likes any of them. Are there any of them that we like less
Cam,
or dislike least?
has there been talk with Senator McKay about how this affects bond ratings when
Yes.
that fund balance goes down? And has that fallen on deaf ears, or is there some sympathy to that?
Yeah, no, we have talked about it. In fact, Ledge Research is doing some research now about the fund balance limits in other states and impact on bond rating. A couple just interesting tidbits though, is Ledge Research has been doing a lot of research for the legislature about property tax, and then we've been supplementing with our research on property tax. So two important things to just acknowledge for us. Number one, our property tax system guarantees revenue for taxing entities. That is not the case in most states around the country, okay? So for a lot of legislators, they view that as a flaw now, whereas we look at that as a benefit of the system, okay? The second piece, this gets to Mike's question, is in a lot of other states, their fund balance limits are lower than ours. So we have guaranteed revenue and we have higher fund balance allowances. You do have high bond ratings in other states as well, even without those two structural benefits that we have here. And so that's been part of the back and forth, is like, absolutely, it has a benefit, but are there ways to ensure that benefit, but still make some tweaks? Let's go, Mayor Zoltansky, and then I'm going to leave this open for about 30 more seconds, and then we'll get to the next one, which will be focused on process. And so, Gary, you're on deck.
So Cam, did you received information about fund balances from cities? Do you have any analysis that you can share with us?
Sure.
Is there an average, or big cities, large cities, or is there any gap that's?
Yeah, absolutely, Mayor. So we shared this with the league officers. We have 91 cities, so that's a third of the cities and towns. Of those 91 cities, right now, half of them have fund balances of between 30 and 35%. Okay. And then another, it was 60 of the 91, so another 15 are between 25 and 30. So even if the legislature reverted back to the 25%, which the law was 6 years ago, of that 91, roughly 2/3 would be above the 25%. Now, what's interesting though, is as we were looking at big city to small town, there wasn't great consistency one way or the other there. So we had some big cities that have lower amounts, which makes sense as a kind of a fraction of your general fund. And we had some small cities that had the higher amount, which makes sense because their general funds are smaller. But we had folks across the spectrum there. One of the conversations we were having with Senator McKay this morning is, does it make sense to look at fund balance more as a spectrum in state law? Because right now, that 35% limit on fund balance applies to all cities, which means Fillmore, population of 2,000-ish, has the same fund balance percentage limit as Sandy City, population of almost 100,000. Well, does that make sense? Towns have up to 100%. Towns are 1,000 in population and below. But that's the distinction right now in the city side. Now, these conversations are on with the counties and the school districts and the special districts as well. And we've been having conversations with all of them. And there are some examples out there of other taxing entities. We know of no cities like this, but other taxing entities that have an arguably an excessive amount of fund balance, like well above what the cap allows. And yeah, we know what those examples are. I'm not going to say their names publicly though. Not cities. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that feedback. That'll be really helpful for the officers and us as we navigate the next few days. Speaking of the next few days, Representative Karen Peterson's House Bill 236 is in Senate committee this afternoon. Since we met last week, it passed the House without a single nay vote and had co-sponsors from dozens of legislators in support of it. We're going to ask a Slido question in a moment, not about the bill as currently drafted, but we're going to ask about an alternative that we've been working on over the last week with our work group. I'm going to turn it over to Gary Hill, the city manager from Bountiful. He and Carrie Nakamura, who's consultant with the league, have been spearheading this potential alternative to still achieve the objectives around additional transparency in the truth and taxation process and the public concern that the entity is not listening to the public as of the August meeting, so achieves those outcomes, but does so in a way that's more workable for taxing entities. We have a meeting with her tonight to go through this. So Gary, will you just take a moment and walk through the concept? And then we're going to ask a Slido question about it to just get your comfort level with what you've been presented today, knowing that on one hand, there's still 13 and a half business days to go. On the other, there are only 13 and a half business days to go. Gary.
The bill as it's currently drafted would require all of us to submit, basically create two budgets. a budget if you're contemplating a tax increase. A property tax, a budget with a property tax increase and a budget without a property tax increase. Her goals, as we understand it, are first and foremost to provide more information earlier to taxpayers about what a property tax increase might go for. It's second to help avoid the perception that a taxing entity has committed or spent the money before they even go through the process. And then a third concern of hers is to make sure that cities have the flexibility to still do what they need to do. And I should add that underlying all of this is she's trying to stave off some much, much worse property tax bills. She's been great to work with on this. Creating two different budgets is really challenging from a technical standpoint. And if you have two 300-page budget documents, it's not that clear anyway what you're trying to do. So Carrie Nakamura came up with a great idea of instead what we propose is you present your budget as currently contemplated, and with it, if you're contemplating a property tax increase, you create a schedule of impacts. Basically, it's a department by department description, both in numbers and in text, of what would happen if the property tax increase doesn't happen. One of her interests is to help people understand what a base budget would look like versus a property tax increase budget. So again, it would be a document to go along with your budget presented at the same time that would summarize what the impacts of a property tax increase not taking place would look like. We're working through the specifics of that, and happy to, Cam, answer any questions. The other portion of this that I probably should mention is there's a lot of question about what we adopt as far as a budget. And so the basic premise is this: if you're not going through truth in taxation, nothing changes in the budget process. If you are, you have to mention earlier and provide more information earlier about what the property tax increase would do. If the legislative body, after they review the budget, makes changes to that preliminary budget, when they adopt an interim budget before the truth in taxation hearing, they update this impact sheet to show what is being proposed at the current time. And then we go through truth in taxation as normally contemplated. The final piece is in order to be able to demonstrate that we are not spending or committing the money early. Her first proposal was we adopt a lower budget, which has all kinds of challenges with it technically and being able to tie things together. She's agreed to let us adopt the budget with the tax increase in it. This would be the June adoption, provided we set aside an equivalent amount of money that would be raised through the property tax increase. Essentially, you're not spending it. You're basically through an accounting mechanism, just saying this money will not be spent until a final budget's adopted in August after the truth in taxation hearing. When you adopt that final budget, basically unlocks that money through a budget amendment, and away we go. Yeah. Are there any questions?
Can you hear me? There we go. Thanks for that. Bettina Smith Edmondson, Layton. I just had a question about the suggestion for the proposed budget and then this amended whatever you would be providing. Would it not be more prudent to have your original budget be submitted without that property tax increase applied already, and then have the addendum to show this is what this property tax would be doing if it were approved? That way, if it wasn't approved, you don't have to go back and make the other changes, but if it is approved, you don't run the risk of the perception of having already budgeted / spent whatever you're asking for. Just help me understand that a
That's a
little bit.
real good key question. Right now, when the budget is proposed, if the budget officer is proposing a tax increase, it is included. So for the city, for the council manager form of government, if it's contemplated that period of time, it is included. And that is the budget from which the legislative body is working off of. To go the other way, to present a budget that might contemplate it but does not include it, there's no way then to tie what the actual impact of the property tax increase with what's in the financial statement. Let me give an example of that. If you're contemplating using a property tax increase and you're saying in your impact statement that we want to use it to hire 2 police officers, if somebody wanted to verify that that money was actually going for 2 police officers, they would not be able to do that unless the budget shows where the property tax increase, I should say the increased budget is intended to be spent. So this is a way to be able to tie all of the documents together in a very transparent way of what the tax increase is for, where it's going in the budget, and how it relates to the property tax notice that people are going to get in July. Does that help? Any other questions? Tomatoes. I should say, we don't want to do this, but this is a far better solution, I think, than having to create 2 completely separate budgets that are not transparent anyway.
Gary, shot from the back after.
Okay, up here first.
And this one is not specifically for you. This is really overarching from the beginning of this tax increment discussion, and all of these bills. There was a statement, I think Mayor Palmer, you mentioned in your meeting this morning that Senator McKay was very concerned about the perception of property tax, and that's why he felt he had to do something. So I'm sorry, but my light bulb just went off, and I wondered, why can we not just tell the truth about property tax and let that assuage the perception? So is there anyone, whether it's all of us, who is just willing to provide that as the alternative to whatever this perception about property tax happens to be? Because all of these bills that are causing more, work for cities, which is going to cost more money, and really cities are not the bulk of the property tax anyway. So can we have a rally cry for truth to kind of be our guide instead of coming up with responses to bad bills to help assuage a perception that is based on not the truth? Sorry.
Hard to disagree.
Yeah, Councilmember, I'll tell you, going back to last summer, I saw more legislators attend truth and taxation hearings than I've ever seen. And legislators attended truth and taxation hearings all over the state and publicly spoke against the tax increases. And then we saw a lot of momentum in those different areas pushing back on those property tax increases. And there is a national effort. In fact, I should have put the picture in here. President Trump just last week called on the abolishing of property tax nationwide. So we talk about property tax and the truth of property tax every single day with legislators. And there are, I'd say there's a strong number of legislators who get it, who don't want to blow the system up. Senator McKay was adamant this morning. Like, he thinks truth and taxation and the property tax system we have in Utah is a good system. There's a lot of political pressure coming from Washington, D.C. all the way down on that system. And so our first priority through the fall was no to everything. Then our second priority was, can we move up truth and taxation so you don't have to do the hearing in August? That doesn't work because of the timeframes for the tax commission and the county assessors. And so then it settled on, okay, these bills over here are the worst possible outcomes. The Tabor bill, the voter approval bill, the CAP bill. Well, sometimes the best defense is a proactive defense. It's not so much going on offense, but it's the proactive defense. And the bills that we've been talking about in LPC for the last month fit in that proactive defense space, where if we can get to yes in these areas that are workable, that helps us fight off the bad bills that are out there and hopefully calms the temperature of those who are looking at doing a statewide initiative to abolish property tax and some of the more draconian things we've seen in other states, like the Wyoming legislature last year cutting all property tax by 25%, regardless of the taxing entity. So let's go Seth, and then I'm going to open up the Slido question here. Go ahead, Seth.
I don't have a question, but really just a comment. Gary, thanks for your work on this. There's some elements to this bill that I think you outlined her desire to be genuinely transparent and improving. I'm not sure that what you talked about will actually do everything that she wants, but I think it will have a better shot of doing what she wants than what we were talking about. And your idea of having a 300-page budget and then a second one and then some kind of game that says, go find the changes. I guess maybe AI can help with that these days, but I don't think that was transparent at all. So I think your work and the collective work has helped us to get it to a much better, more transparent place that hopefully informs the public better. And Bettina, council member, if I could be just a little snarky for a second, we only do truth in taxation in August. That's the only time we do that. There's no other truth in taxation, period. All right, snarky Seth is done.
Hi, I'm Lauren Colby with the City of Kearns, District 4. It sounds great that we're talking about doing away with property taxes. Yay. Then what? Because now we've got this hole that we need to fill where we need to come up with that money that we're not having. And I'm speaking about myself here because I own my house. And so I pay property taxes like others. I also own some land. It's not much in another county. So I get that we need to come up with tax revenue, but just for every little finger we chop off, we have to spread the money around to the rest of them. And what do we do then?
So I appreciate that comment, and I just want to point out that House Bill 236 does not contemplate reducing revenue. It doesn't, right? Sure, but I'm just saying that part of the reason we focused on trying to make this bill workable in the process piece is that it would not affect the revenues that come to taxing entities. But there are certainly legislators up here that would like to do that. That's the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. And I often tell our staff that we reside at the intersection of law, policy, and politics. And we as a league try to approach everything policy first. And I think on the property tax space, that has been our approach as we met with House and Senate leadership, as we've met with multiple legislators, policy first about property tax, that only 13% of an average property tax bill goes to cities. And look at the benefit that you get as a resident from those property tax dollars that go to cities. So we've laid all those cases out. Then what came back is, well, here's the politics. Here's the national uproar against property tax. Here's the local concern about property tax. Here are all the grassroots groups that are out there organizing against property tax. And now we find ourselves in this intersection where our ultimate priority is to preserve your ability to use property tax, manage property tax, and when necessary, raise property tax to meet your needs. That's why we focused in on trying to make this bill workable, because it doesn't impact those fundamental authorities that you have. So with that being said, SB 238 is Senator Wilson's bill to make some cleanups from last year's truth and taxation process. We've been working on amendments there. But I want to open up to the Slido question. Are we on the right track with what Gary just described? Because we have to meet with Representative Karen Peterson and the school districts and the counties and the service districts and the Taxpayers Association and the other stakeholders later today. And if we're not on the right track, we need to know now. If we are on the right track, or you're uncertain, that's okay. But we just need to know from the group where we are collectively based on this impact statement / key changes concept that Gary just presented. Cassidy, any other questions online? Okay. Any comments to hit while we leave this open? Yeah, so a question about one of the potential consequences, if you make truth in taxation too onerous, is a shift to fees, and the legislature doesn't like fees either. Yeah, I think that gets to the finger point that the councilman from Kearns was referencing too of, well, at the end of the day, we need money to rebuild our roads and pay our police officers and provide the services that people rely on. Okay, I'm going to leave this open for another moment and then talk about another tax issue. So again, I know we've only made it halfway through the agenda and it is, yeah, man, we got to hurry. Okay, I'll leave this open for 5 more seconds. Okay, we'll just skip the other tax bills, property tax related bills. SB 247 and HB 575 are both about the gas tax. And ultimately what you need to know right now, that's covering my recommendation. Well, take my word for it. Oh, there it goes. Staff recommendation support 247. This adjusts the floor of the gas tax for how we calculate the gas tax. I'll spare you the long history lesson of how we got to this point in the gas tax. The 30-second version is this: 70% of the gas tax stays with the state. 30% is shared with cities, counties, and towns. That's based on a 50-50 formula, not the sales tax formula, but a different 50-50 formula. You see it listed there with weighted lane mile population. About 60% goes to cities and towns. 60% of the 30%. With Senator Buss's bill, she's trying to increase the floor that goes into the calculation for what the gas tax is. The gas tax in state law basically has a range. It calculates it. It doesn't go below this number, doesn't go above this number, and that factor in the calculation is what gets you to the tax. So she's trying to bump that to be reflective of where we're at right now, and that language is a decade old. Okay. This gives you just a quick sense, the 178, yeah, this gives you a sense of the rack price, which is what goes into that calculation, and then what the tax looks like on top of it. So we're supportive of that bill because it cleans up the calculation. That's what that bill does. Representative Roberts' bill, House Bill 575, this has been the gas tax bill we've been waiting for all session. It's a priority of Speaker Schultz. What it started at versus what it is now are two different things. We're recommending position pending now because the bill came out yesterday. It is in committee tomorrow, and we still need to work through the actual calculations. What we're anticipating here is that this bill will result in a short-term gas tax cut for the state, counties, cities, and towns. That is our anticipation, but we still have details we need to work through over the next couple of days. So our recommendation is position pending. Now keep in mind, if the state cuts the gas tax, they take a much bigger hit than we do, because 70% goes to them, 30% to locals. So we have raised the concern going all the way back to July. I had my first gas tax conversation with Speaker Schultz in July about gas tax. And he said, I get it. I know you guys get a lot of it. We'll make sure that once the bill is out, we'll talk through what those ramifications are. So that's why position pending for now is we're working through this. But in its first draft, it's contemplating a short-term reduction, and then it would come back up. Okay. In committee tomorrow morning, this is just the graph that demonstrates what I was just describing of how much goes to UDOT versus how much goes to local governments, and then how much goes to cities and towns versus counties. So super important for us, a fraction of what it means to the state. Okay. Any questions on gas tax, where we're at? Okay. People taking pictures. Yeah, we'll share slides tonight, so giddy up. Okay. And then this again just gives you that graphic of what I was just describing. I just should have moved it forward. So stay tuned, more details to come. Okay, housing and land use. Still a lot of position pendings because we're waiting on substitutes. So I'm going to rapid fire these. This is Senator Fillmore's land use bill that came out of dialogue within the land use task force. We surveyed some of these options during the fall, both with LPC and the City Managers Association. But again, we're working on a substitute. So right now it's position pending. If you have thoughts about what's in there now, just reach out to Jared and we can talk through it, and stay tuned. You'll notice at the top, really bad to MOK. This is an example that Councilmember Smith Edmondson, you were talking about speaking truth. The first meeting we had on this bill, the bill was over 100 pages long, and a lot of it was very objectionable. The bill that's before us now has consensus concepts that we're just working on language and looks completely different than what it looked like when we had that first meeting. And that was a feisty meeting, let's put it that way. Okay, House Bill 477 is the other land use task force bill, Planning Commission, response to the West Hills litigation, clarifications from 2 bills from last year, and then detached ADUs. We've talked about this ad nauseum at LPC. We're just waiting for the substitute to reflect what we've negotiated. So stay tuned. We'll have an update on that next week to address those 3 key points that are listed at the bottom. Okay. All right. The good news here, House Bill 184, we've got handouts. You made a difference last week. Those of you online, those of you still in the room, you made a difference. This bill was held in committee, and 6 different legislators on the committee all spoke up asking questions that came directly from you. It was terrific. It was also a pitched battle, and still is. Okay? So currently that bill is held in committee. Representative Ward has prepared a substitute, and the substitute makes some changes on the margins. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of the bill. Okay. So we went full attorney on this bill because the reason it's fundamentally flawed is because it truly undermines your ability to plan and zoning communities and undermines the legislative authority of your city councils. The one-pager Cassie's handing out will be linked online. And there's a lot in here to digest, but we thought it was important for you to understand kind of what this bill truly means for local authority. Because part of the argument has been, well, the city can still say no, but it's still the state coming in and putting its thumb on the scale on your legislative authority as city councils, okay? So admittedly, this is more of a legal brief than we normally do up here, but I thought it was important for everyone to have that common understanding. If you have committee members, let me just point out, like, we've crossed out what the third substitute would do. Changes the word sketch, adds a few more days for review, limits applicability to urban counties, and then says if you've been denied once in the last 5 years, you can reapply, but the council has to say yes. But they're all things that are on the margins of the bill rather than the foundation of the bill. So we still need to oppose it. And these legislators all delivered by casting a vote to hold. There is a lot of pressure on them to reconsider. So our ask of you, we're not going to go person by person like we did last week. If you have relationships with these legislators, follow up with them and say, just continue holding the bill. The bill is still flawed. We will be fighting it. Just hold the bill. They don't need to put it back on a committee agenda. So ask the legislators to just hold the bill even with the substitute. So, Mayor Ramsey. In microphone.
Sorry. Feedback we received from our legislator about this after the committee meeting last week was that, yes, it was held, but he anticipates with the amendments that it'll go through fine.
That was the feeling Tuesday morning, was that, oh, it just needs a few amendments. And we said it absolutely does not need a few amendments. So part of the intent of the white paper we just circulated was to show the depth of concern about the bill. So
we'll keep working. I just
Yep.
wanted to know that's what he reported back to us.
Yep. Yeah, I can tell you there are other folks that are pushing this bill hard, kind of leaning on these legislators. So we have to lean equally hard. We need to lean harder because this is your authority, right? It will be. Yeah. Yep. We're putting the finishing touches on it this morning. It'll be linked. Is it linked in? Yep, it's linked in the chat room, and then it will be part of tonight's email. But it could pop over the next 13 and a half days, folks. Committee hearings are happening 2 to 3 blocks of time per day. And the same committee will meet 3 times a week. So it wasn't in committee this morning. It could be on committee tomorrow. If it's not in tomorrow, it might be Thursday morning. If it's not Thursday morning, it could be Friday afternoon. So that's why it's important that legislators keep hearing from you about this bill. Okay. Justin, do we need to do impact fees, or did we get what we needed in the meeting this morning? Because I know you still have Slido. Okay. So more impact fee bills coming. The last thing I'll just say, just in the land use space, is there are substitutes coming. The substitutes will drop, and then we'll have 24 hours to respond. So when you get an action alert, it's because we need you to respond and make sure legislators know. And this morning you made a difference because we had another representative Ward bill in committee around private inspections, deja vu. And Councilmember Smith Edmondson, your point about like speaking truth here, like we have shared our data repeatedly with legislators of cities meeting the deadlines, and ultimately the legislature agreed, like, yep, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Held the bill in committee. But just because a bill is held in committee doesn't mean it's dead. Bills don't actually die until the last night. So thank you for your outreach this morning, but just know it needs to continue. Real quick on billboards, there's language going back and forth. We're actually waiting for UDOT to get back to us. So stay tuned on this one. I got enough feedback from folks who I emailed within the league that we're comfortable with our counter proposal. We're just waiting on feedback from UDOT. This is one where it could be, we're okay, or it could turn into full court press action alert, and that could happen in a matter of minutes. So please, please, please stay tuned with all these bills. 492, we've got a technical meeting today. If your city has examples of where investing in water or sewer infrastructure could unlock housing units, and you're willing to share those with the media, let us know today. We've got reporters interested in this bill. It's a great chance to proactively tell our story. Tell us examples you have, and we can connect you with reporters around House Bill 492, okay? All right, we have Slido questions on elections and WUI, and that's, Justin, I'll come back to you. You sure? Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Jared, we'll do WUI, and then anything else we need to do? Do we need to do? Nope. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your advocacy and for your time today. Jared, take us home.
Okay. So we've brought this up before. Just wanted to review at the very bottom there the differences between each of these maps because we're going to ask a Slido on it. The top one there is municipal WUI map. This is the one that you were required to create by January 1 of this year that identifies areas that the building code, the wildland urban interface building code would apply to. The second one is the state high-risk WUI map. This is directly related to the assessments that will be on individual properties. And then the last thing there, smooth structure exposure score. This is the map that we talked about last time. It has a sliding scale from 1 to 8 on the level of exposure of fire risk, essentially. And this is the map. As you can see, again, we're all still on fire. Just going back, the Wildland Urban Interface Code defines the interface as a geographical area where structures and other human development meets or intermingles with wildland or vegetative fuels. So this was an example that I gave last time. Hopefully it's a little bit more clear. So here's the line going down 5, 6, and 7, and 8. That becomes more prone to fire risk than those that are more inland, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and so I told you last time that that there would be some sort of proposal. That proposal, that sub, is out. So Representative Peterson's sub does two things. One, it adopts the 2024 Wildland Urban Interface Code, and two, it sets up and says the city WUI map has to be linked to this line of the forestry, fire, and state land line of 5 and above. So that means that cities cannot put their WUI map anywhere in 4, 3, 2, or 1. It has to be either 5 and above. Okay, so that is the current where we're at right now. So we want your feedback, and the question is, how do you feel about only being able to designate your city's WUI area as those areas that are high-risk designation, which is that score of 5 or above? And there will be another question right after this that that assesses everyone's feelings on whether their opinion changes if there's an appeal process through the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. But this one is just as it is. How do you feel about that? I have some questions, Cassidy says. Well, once it was it would have been adopted. The 2024 code would have been adopted. From the 2006, there was a lot of versions in between that they did not adopt. And so it's going from the 2006 version to adopting the 2024 version. Okay, where are we at? 124? Is that critical mass?
Jared, could I ask a question? Sorry, Katie Villani from Midway. Two questions, actually.
Okay.
One is within the level 5, can you still draw the line anywhere you want within 5?
Yes.
And the second part is House Bill 48 also had that provision that I think was supposed to limit insurance increases by saying they have to go by the state high risk findings on their map. But what, if anything, is going to enforce that? I mean, aren't insurers still going to just do what they want to do? And what enforcement mechanism is proposed for that?
So,
monitoring.
Do you want me to give my cynical answer? No. The property insurance folks have to provide a reason why they are either declining or lowering coverage, or raising fees rather. This essentially gives them an outline of who to drop and who to keep.
But
If they,
if they just
yeah, there
give
really
whatever
isn't.
reason they come up with, right?
There isn't.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, we're gonna go to the next one. This one, the only difference here is that there is a opportunity to appeal. We don't know what this looks like yet. We're still going to be meeting with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands on what that looks like. But how comfortable, does that change your mind? That would be the city saying, we want to draw our map to include areas of 4, 3, 2, or 1. Hi, President. Okay.
The appeal criteria. What do we have to meet?
Mayor Bradshaw asked, what is the appeal criteria and what do we need to meet to show that it needs to be changed from the Forestry, Fire, and State Lands? I don't know. And it's still being developed as far as I understand and what I've been told. That appeal process. Okay, well, we're at 77, but I know we're, yes, Lynn. Speak loud and I'll repeat. Well, that's essentially what this is doing, because they're saying anything 5 and above is high risk, and that's where your WUI map should be. It shouldn't be below that, and cities that put it below that are being over-inclusive in their WUI, who is going to have to abide by the WUI code, the building code.
I'm going to provide an editorial comment.
That's why you're president.
Last year, in the legislation that was put in place that asked us all to adopt these WUI maps, and to do that by the end of 2025. We were in many ways asked to provide our local knowledge about our own topography and our areas and ravines and areas where we know we have fire risk in our cities. This year, the state is shifting gears in this 5 and above approach. So what we all thought we were planning and preparing for last legislative session is not what we were being told to plan and prepare for under this bill, this legislative session. And part of the reason I asked the question about what is that criteria for an appeal, my city did adopt our WUI map in December. We applied some of that local knowledge about areas of concern where we have great risk and are greatly concerned about wildfires. But that map has been held up as as an example of being too overly cautious. But yet we don't know what our appeal options would be because the criteria is not yet spelled out in the bill. So, Jared, I'm going to give it back to you now that I have taken this editorial moment.
There you go. Okay. We're going to skip over everything else, I think.
All right, just a quick update on local administrative advisors program. General government prioritized the LAA funding highly, which is great news for us. It's now going to executive appropriations. And executive approps will be awaiting state revenue projections in the next few days, and they'll deliberate until the last day. So just some good updates on us there. One last reminder, you've heard it a few times today, but we have 20% more bills this year. It means we need at least 20% more flexing of the League Army muscles. So you did a great job last week. Keep it up. Respond to those action alerts. Stay in touch with your representatives. I'll look for a motion to ratify the bill tracker. Sorry, I can't hear very well. Anyone? Okay, and a second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye, great. I will look for a motion to adjourn. A second. All in favor? See you next time.